Yeah, just to put it into some context, there's this debate raging at the moment between science and religion and evolution and God. And there are many of these pseudo-scientific, quasi-intellectual atheists who want you to believe that for the longest time, human beings were these foolish, ridiculous, ignorant barbarians. what they what they are doing is that, like, out of the totality of what religion is, the complexity and sophistication and nuances, they're selecting a very small little shape and taking that out and interpreting that within their framework. Yeah, but what they're also doing is very strange, because they're professing to be the scientific experts, but out of the totality of what science has discovered and is discovering at the cutting edge of all these many different fields of genetics and anthropology and biology and neuroscience and psychology and all these ologies and um, again, they are taking a very small selection and pulling out that shape and interpreting it according to their particular framework. Within their tiny bubble, they do make some valid, valuable points. And so there's a lot about religious systems that are quite archaic and that don't fit the modern world that we live in today. And yeah, so there are many examples of that, like the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, the way they persecuted the scientists. I mean, that gave rise to this whole dichotomy, this division between science and religion. More recently, in the Catholic Church, they instead of holding these sexual abusers, these priests of theirs that were sexually abusing minors, children, instead of holding them accountable, punishing them, putting them in jail, they tried to save face and relocated these guys to other areas where they could continue doing what they were doing. They were enabling sexual abuses. This is a terrible, terrible, horrible tragedy. Do not underestimate how serious this is and how deeply entrenched it is within the entire system of the church. Yeah, but yet there's a difference between the church and between Christian people, between the political expression of faith within Islamic countries and ordinary, everyday Muslim people going about their lives. And the same can be said about every culture and people and their religion. But now, if you followed the series, you'll see that there's a lot more to religion than what these guys are interpreting. Religion is fascinating, but yet, okay, let's recognize again a point that, okay, they're saying that religion is not objectively, ultimately true, because if it was, if there was this God, this man up there in the sky who was wanting everyone to believe in him and he was revealing himself to them, then around the world, in all these different places and cultures, everyone should have a very similar representation, images and idols and conceptions of this supreme being. But the fact that we don't, that there's this incredible diversity of images and idols and representations, so it means that there's a lot more going on here. There's a lot that's happening in human imagination and creativity, but that doesn't mean that it's simply a fiction and a fabrication and a bunch of nonsense. Like language, it just fascinates me, that there are thousands of ways that people have found to communicate about the things that are important in their lives, and then they create unique sounds to refer to each and every object and idea. And so like now I'm living here in Mauritius and people speak Creole and French, and so I'm really sensitized to this thing of language because I don't speak the language, and I'm constantly not understanding what people are saying because I don't have those sound structures in my brain to receive that information, so yeah, but yeah, it fascinates me. But like it's this human creativity and intelligence and imagination that shaped all these languages, these unique languages, And so something similar is happening with religion in people's attempt to grapple with the phenomena, the external phenomena and internal phenomena that govern their lives, that are important to them. And so in the same way that we don't simply reject language and throw it out because it's not objectively true, all the languages should have the same word for the same thing. We don't do that because language is useful and we need it to communicate, and it's spurred human progress and development through the ages. It's accelerated it, you know. And yeah, so a similar thing is happening with religion, and for the similar reason, you cannot just simply throw religion out. Cultures that persist, that last for centuries, for millennia, like the typical thing that this age of empires, a culture begins and then it improves and it gradually grows in power and strength and reaches the height of its beauty and prosperity and its golden age, and then it begins to decline and degenerate, and then it completely collapses and is conquered by another culture. So that cycle is something like 1,000 years or so, and so like for a culture to last for 1,000 years, it must be predicated on something, must be based on something meaningful, something real. And we find that the cultures and the systems that last the longest are the ones that bring social stability and cohesion and common understanding. And so the religions and the mythological, the symbolic systems are representations of the phenomena of life, the external and internal phenomena of life. And so the vibrance of your collective father, your alpha male, and your culture mother, your omega female, they work together synergistically in this way to shape the culture and to shape the religion and to order the society, to bring law and order and governance, to bring healing and stability and cooperation in a vibrant way that elevates human thinking and imagination and understanding. And this allows them to grapple with the dynamics of their lives with agriculture and commerce and warfare and every aspect of life. So religion is not simply belief in this higher power, in this fear of this higher power. It's so much more sophisticated and complex and nuanced. So, out of the totality of what science has discovered and is discovering constantly at the cutting edge of these various scientific ologies and onomies, there's so much happening and so many answers being generated, but every time an answer is generated, new questions are being posed, and so there's no end, there's no final decision on the matter, there are only deeper and deeper mysteries that we are beginning to examine and sometimes explore and sometimes figure out something about something, So, like, these pseudo-scientific, quasi-intellectual atheists, they want you to believe that they've got it all figured out, But if you look closer, you'll see that actually what this thing is, it's a kind of a anti-religious, uh, atheistic dogma. What dogma means is an insistent holding to a belief despite evidence to the contrary. So like what happens in the religious sphere is that, people develop a certain explanation about some phenomenon or process, and then that kind of helps them to, uh, calm down or not to be too overwhelmed and stressed and anxious about it. But it also helps them to engage with that phenomenon, and it also helps them to understand it in a certain way, a symbolic kind of way, and to make some kind of a progress. But now, if that explanation becomes like the final word, if it becomes dogma, then it becomes a barrier to further exploration and understanding and research. And it's like, no, don't question that. It's already been resolved. It's already been decided, kind of thing. So the same thing can happen and is happening in science. When scientists decide that they've explained something, and there's no reason to question it or to doubt it, or then that becomes a barrier. It becomes a dogma, a dogmatic approach. The Darwinists look to Darwin with this kind of mythic religious awe. But Darwin himself was quite a reclusive guy. He was, he kept to himself a lot. He even held his book back for such a long time because he was afraid of what people would say. And but yet he wasn't an atheist himself. He would walk his wife and kids to church on Sunday, but then he would go off into the woods, and that was where he had his connection to the divine. So he described himself as an agnostic, which is someone who believes in a higher power, a higher wisdom, but doesn't follow any particular church or religion or denomination or whatever. DNA is this tiny, invisible little, very long chain molecule inside each of our cells, trillions of cells in the body. But if you zoom in, you find that it's actually this gigantic molecule with something like 2 billion base pairs. 2 billion. The actual mechanism of how these things replicate and copy the genes for certain traits. They're distributed in different parts of DNA, and DNA is a coded sequence. There are many different segments of within a gene, and many different genes and many different gene groups, and so an error happens at a very specific place in a very specific way. There are individual molecules that need to be replicated. So if you want a random error to give you a beneficial mutation, you actually need many random errors, but they cannot be random because they have to be arranged in a certain way for a beneficial mutation to develop. There's an incredible amount of intelligence happening, and it's improvising. It's figuring things out. It's constantly ever active at various levels. So not just at the level of organisms, creatures, but also within us, within our cells, within our brains. So you look at bats, these rodents, descendants of the very first mammals who somehow figured out how to fly. And then, if that wasn't enough, they figured out how to see in the dark using their ears. So how did they do that? You ask yourself, how did they do that? So scientists have found some clues to that they've done some studies, but also just if you look at how blind people can sometimes have this uncanny ability, not sometimes, often have this uncanny ability to navigate in their dark world using their other senses, which are somehow enhanced. The bat's ears, like the bat is living in this dark cave, completely dark cave, and so it's not getting any useful visual information. So those visual neurons are quiet. But the auditory neurons, they're hearing richly complex reverberations coming from all directions, and the neurons begin to represent these and to find patterns and to develop neural networks around those and to connect to important systems like navigation. So the bat can now use its ears and this rich information to navigate in the dark. that cannot be explained by random errors and natural selection. And we take it for granted, but that is mind-blowing. Like, it's only how many, I don't know how long ago, a few decades ago, that people started using sonar and it's probably because of the bats and the dolphins and the whales that they realized that they could do this thing. We've learned so many things from the creatures and from the instinctive things that they just do naturally that their brains figured out. So the bat is not smart enough to know that it's doing all of those things. It's not consciously doing all of those things, but those things are happening within it, and it's not happening because of random errors and natural selection and what have you. And so it's far more mysterious and interesting and complicated than the Dawkins and the Harris and these chaps want you to believe. One of my, I can say, formative personal experiences was one day when, my friends somehow persuaded me to go dancing with them to a nightclub one night. Like they used to go often. I had different groups of friends: the soccer playing friends, and the clubbing friends, and the artistic friends, and that. But I was actually quite shy and nervous, like reclusive character, social anxiety, avoidant personality, those things. But this night, they somehow persuaded me, and so I went with. And so we're driving out of town to the outskirts of town, this kind of like farm area, and then there's this farmhouse, and then you hear the music and then you get to this dark farmhouse, and then you go inside, and it's people hanging around, and like in those days, apartheid was just coming to an end, and so it was still like this. Uh, the racial divide is still a thing, a major thing. But anyways, at this place, you don't feel these vibes. You don't feel people were watching you and judging you, and that. So you go inside and you get into this underground basement kind of place where these lights are strobing. It's black and white, and you just see people in these jittery movements because the strobing lights, and then the DJ box has this constant red light, so it looks like it's floating. And it's just this really trippy. I wasn't on anything, but it's really trippy. But at some point, you feel like, okay, nobody's watching me. So I can move. I can start to move, and try to dance. For the first time. I wasn't a good dancer. I never danced before, really, because I'm always too anxious about it and self-conscious. But yeah, there's really good uplifting trance music, and you're doing your thing there, you kind of forget yourself, and that's the beauty of that. But anyways, my story is that the next morning, like, you emerge in the early hours of the morning, it's still dark, and you get into the car, and then you drive. We drove down to the zoo lake, which is this big lake near to the zoo, and the huge gardens and lots of trees and woods around. And we thought we'll catch the sunrise. And so when we got there, like most of the guys just conked out in the car. They were really tired. But me and another friend, we went down to the water's edge and smoked a joint. And this mother duck and her ducklings come walking past, and I'm watching them, and now I'm fascinated and I'm mesmerized with what's going on. It's something I've never noticed before, but now I'm observing, and I'm seeing that there's this invisible bond between them. So as the mother duck walks, they are moving around her chicklets, maybe like 6 or 7 of them, and some are behind her, and they foraging and looking around here and there, and some are in front of her and doing that, and like they want to explore, and they're trying to move out, but they're also connected to her, and they're also remaining within this invisible sphere, this invisible circle around her, this connection, like an invisible umbilicus, keeping them connected to each other so that they don't stray too far. And so they're chirping also, they're constantly communicating, and mother is listening, and duckling is listening. And I was just I'm describing all these things, but like at the time I wasn't thinking. I was just completely in the moment with these ducks. And I said to my friend, I just had a religious moment. My friend wasn't impressed because, like, according to Islam, you're not supposed to be smoking weed, and let alone having religious experiences when you're high. But I couldn't explain it to him. Yeah, but it was much later that I discovered, learned more about attachment theory and the evolution of love and how this attachment bond between the mother duck and her duckling uh, works and why it works and how it is, how it functions within the primitive, rudimentary neurological system in the tiny brain of these creatures, you know. So, what I was in awe of wasn't ducks. It was ducks, but it was the evolution of love that I was looking at, that I was having this mystical reverence for. And then, I mean, more recently, I've been looking at human psychology and attachment theory with human parenting styles and attachment styles, and how important that is to our personality development. This small little uh, big bang from where everything came, you know. But that's one interpretation that's now been called into question by the very uh, tool that they launched into space to investigate it, because James Webb, pointing it at the far edge of the universe, is now finding galaxies that shouldn't be there, these very naughty galaxies that are much bigger and much older than they should be. And this is kind of embarrassing to the scientific community, because it means that the universe is much bigger and much older than they ever imagined, you know. So there is an alternative explanation, and that it's quite simple and intuitive when you think about it, and makes a lot more sense, you know. So it's possible that this red shift is not to do with the speed of the galaxies. And this is what Einstein thought. Remember Einstein, the guy who gave us relativity and equals mc squared, the most celebrated, brilliant scientific genius of all time. He didn't buy into this whole Big Bang and expanding universe. Out of the totality and complexity and beauty of human relationships and connections and life, you know, people going about their daily lives, working, selling stuff, making things, helping others. You know, these guys, they're selecting the tiny little sample of radical fundamentalists and, you know, really bad examples of religious people, and presenting that as the totality of that particular culture or religion. The problem with these guys is that they are these kind of disembodied intellectuals stuck in their heads, stuck in their academic silos, up there looking down at the world and, you know, analyzing, and their filter blocks out all this other information about what's really going on in the world and with people, so that they can stay fixated on their little atheistic, anti-religious unbelief system. Not everyone is good and nice and friendly. There are these, let's call it, four levels, you know. So you get these fundamentalist types, and they're a very small percentage, let's say around 5%, and that's being generous, you know. But these people are really dogmatic, and they are really fundamentalist and zealous, and they have very volatile emotional schemas around their belief system, and they had it traumatized and punished and wounded into them and damaged into them as children, and so now they cannot think about their faith, and they are prone to getting involved in these kind of radical movements, and they are capable of doing really terrible and horrible things in the name of their religion. But it's not in the name of their religion, because their religion doesn't advocate those things, you know. The next layer, and this is the big layer, your conservative people, you know. So the majority of religious people, spiritual people, any people, even secular people, even scientific people, even atheists, is the conservative people. So these people, they believe what they believe, and they not really interested in engaging with anyone else. So they stick to their own kind, and they don't want to know ideas outside of their framework, their ideology, their belief system, value system. They just want to carry on within their known sphere, and they don't want things to change. Now, that's, let's say, maybe 55%. Now, the next layer is your tolerant people. And so, again, across the board, across all different religious systems, racial systems, what have you. So there are these tolerant people who are more open-minded, and they're willing to have a conversation, and they can talk to you without getting all worked up and upset. But a lot of them are proselytizing. They're trying to teach their faith to other people. So they still believe that their faith is the correct faith, and their ideology is the right ideology. But they're willing to allow you to have your own ideas, and it doesn't generate conflict. So this tolerance is good. But there's still something better and above it. So the tolerant, what can we say? We had 5 plus 55 is 60. So let's say these are 35% tolerant. So now that leaves us with 5% who are the integral people. So these people, they are really keen to learn from other cultures and perspectives and viewpoints. So they are constantly engaging people in conversation, not to argue with them, not to fight with them, not to convert them, but to learn from them, and to enhance their own understanding and their lives and relationships with that knowledge and awareness. And so they have this sense, this awareness, this consciousness that we are all one people. These divisions, they are kind of superficial. They don't really define us. They're not really what we are. But our humanity is what really defines us. And so these integral people, they don't hold, they may hold to certain belief systems and religions and stuff, and practice those religions, but they're not so hard and fast on it in a sense that it divides them from other people, but rather they use it in a way that unites them with other people. So if you look, and if you feel, and if you engage, you will find religious people doing really wonderful and amazing things, and I've experienced it for myself. So in 2020, I was in Stellenbosch. I was studying psychology, and COVID pandemic hit, and my sponsor pulled out, and so I suddenly didn't have money to pay my fees. I didn't have money to pay my rent. I didn't have money for food, and my daughter was far away in Mauritius, and I was missing her so much. I was I was shattered. I was broken, man. I was broken, and there was this family, this Christian family, and they they looked after me in Jesus' name. So when I arrived in town, they picked me up at the taxi station, the taxi rank. They took me home and fed me and gave me a place to stay. And they were fun, and they were interesting, and they were cool. And then they found me a place to stay, and we had to look around to find an apartment. And they helped me to get settled in and set up, and they invited me to their church, and I would go on Sundays, and there was always a warm welcome and an interesting sermon and friends. I made lots of friends, and there was food, and they would bring me food when I was going through difficult times, and bring me bedding and warm blankets and stuff. And I just was so grateful. I'm so grateful to them, and there are many people like that. There are different kinds of Christians, and within their church also there were conservative and tolerant, but when you meet these integral people, it really warms your heart, and I've met Muslim people who've helped me so much. I've met all kinds from all walks of life, and they're really good people in every cultural and religious system, so don't allow these guys to delude you with their tiny little selection sample representation and telling you that this is what these people are all about. And if that's not enough, what they're also doing is that out of the totality of experiences and interesting and fascinating and unexplainable and mysterious things that are happening in the world and in normal everyday human lives, they are selecting a tiny little explanation of how things are and how things should be, when actually it's a lot more complex and mysterious and interesting. I had this other experience where I was going through a very difficult time in my relationship with my wife, her borderline personality episodes, rage, and it was just getting too much and it was affecting me and affecting my daughter. And I needed to make a decision whether to stay with her and try to heal and try to work on it, or whether to separate and to take my daughter and to go to a place of safety and for us to heal and for her to have some time to reevaluate what's important to her in her life. And so I went to the beach one day. That's what I do when I've got this heavy thing in my heart and soul, take it to the ocean. And usually my daughter comes with me, but that day she couldn't come. So she said, "Daddy, bring me something." So she normally never asks me to bring her something. So I was walking and I was going to our favorite spot and I'm looking for something. And I see this shell, which is different from the other shells, and like oval shaped, and kind of like perfectly oval shaped. So I'm intrigued and I pick it up and it's like kind of rough, and like curved. But when I turn it around, I'm amazed, fascinated to see this smooth, beautiful, delicate, cream colored, with orange and purplish tones, knotless spiral. Wow, I'd never seen anything like that before in my life, and I've been to many beaches. The ocean was speaking to me. It was kind of like, you remember in the beginning of Moana, when Moana goes to the ocean, the ocean gives her the heart of Te Fiti, which is like this nautilus spiral thing. But at the time, I wasn't getting that connection to Moana. We had seen Moana the year before, and beautiful movie with, wow, what a message, man! Because Moana says, okay, it's a spoiler, so if you haven't seen it, just skip. But yeah, at the end, like the whole time, they're trying to return the heart of Te Fiti, but there's this big volcanic lava monster, Teka, who's trying to stop them and is trying to fight them. And eventually Moana has this realization, this brilliant insight, that Teka is actually Te Fiti who's missing her heart, and that's why she's become so monstrous. And she returns the heart of Te Fiti to Teka and transforms her back into Te Fiti, the beautiful, peaceful mother goddess. Now, if I had made that connection, I would have understood the message, but I didn't make the connection. I didn't understand the message. And so eventually I did take my daughter and we did leave. And in hindsight, I think that was a big mistake. But in another way, it was wonderful for us to have this space to heal. And but anyway, sometime later, I contacted the marine biology department of my university and I asked them, "What is this thing?" I sent them a picture. And so she sent me this very interesting email. She says, "That is an operculum of a sea slug, a sea snail called Turbo Sammaticus." So what Turbo does is when he's under threat, then he uses this operculum, which is like at the end of his tail or something, and he pulls it in, he gets into his shell, and he pulls the door closed. So that thing is the door of his shell. And so he hides away inside his shell to keep safe. And when I read this, I was like, wow, that's exactly what I was trying to do. That's what I was going through. That's what was going through my mind. That's what the dilemma, the whole problem was about, trying to protect myself and protect my child from danger. And the ocean gave me not just a symbol, but an actual thing